Hi everyone, I'm Barbara Womack and this is my progress report on the negative effects on mental health from video games. This presentation will go over the purpose, audience, and background of my report, and then I'll dive into my progress, discuss my results, and what still needs to be done. So my report is just a general information report that aims to study and analyze the negative impacts on mental health that video games may have on teenagers and young adults from the age of 13 to 25. That being said, my report's intended audience are people who play video games that are aged 13 to 25. I do think there's a secondary audience that would include the parents of teenagers who play video games. My hopes are to bring awareness to the negative implications that video games have on mental health so that people who game can have and practice better gaming habits and keep away from habits that may make their mental health suffer. So, why is this important? Well, the brain stops maturing at the age of 25. So, from 13 to 25, there's a lot of change that happens that affects the way that your brain makes connections. For example, understanding and responding to rewards, inhibiting impulse and judgment, but specifically the part of your brain that handles emotion. So, introducing video games at this critical age of brain development definitely affects how your brain makes these connections. In a study done to find a relationship between psychological functioning and video games, found that video games encourage symptoms of depression, anxiety, anger, and even found a positive correlation between coping mechanisms in video games, all which are evidence of poor mental health, which is defined as the emotional, psychological, and social well-being of a person. So, understanding how video games may implicate mental health can help to protect people's brain health and promote better video game habits. So, now let's discuss my progress and where I'm at. So, my progress has been pretty consistent. As you can see, I've completed task 1, 2, and 3. I'm still working on 4 in my final draft, but here are here's the tasks more specifically. The first 2 regard research, which I will get into in just a minute, but I'm currently finishing up 3, which is updating my peers, and I started working on task 4, which included my peer review and revising my paper. So let's talk about my results, my preliminary findings. At the beginning of my research, I needed to narrow down my audience, to which I found age to be very important. I found a study performed on 14-year-old boys that compared the mental health of boys that played outside versus the mental health of boys that played video games, to which they found that video games strongly correlated to high emotional problems, decreased life satisfaction, and decreased pro-social behavior. Because of the research I've done on brain development, we know that we can compare this to those in similar age ranges and most likely get the same results. It also hits every check mark on the definition of mental health. But I also found that video games can delay the implications of dementia and Alzheimer's on people older than 65, suggesting that the effects of video games on mental health are very dependent on age range. Another result I found that is exposure to violence at a young age can slow down brain development. About 50% of the video games played in the US are action or shooter games. These games typically have a violent or mature nature to them and are typically played by teenagers and young adults. We know that brain development affects how our emotions are processed, so if this process is dysfunctional, the way that we process our feelings will be dysfunctional. This leads to things like low self-esteem, negative self-image, increased volatility, being unable to control emotions, in addition to depression and anxiety. So this suggests that there's poor mental health as an outcome due to violence in video games. So, according to the World Health Organization, video game addiction is classified as a mental illness. While not everybody suffers from this addiction, there's a lot of abuse of video games, meaning it's used in a problematic way, similar to the way that we would talk about drug or alcohol abuse. This addiction often starts out as a coping mechanism. Let me explain. People often use video games for pleasure, learning, and motivation, but these cues are cravings and changes the brain in a way that leads to addiction. They begin playing as a way to feel good, but it turns into something that they can't control. As a result, they become more aggressive and impulsive. Like I said, they're unable to control their emotions. And sometimes this addiction takes over their life, allowing them to have a poor quality of life. While not everyone becomes addicted, people who abuse video games share a lot of similar symptoms. That's why I think it's important to spread awareness to others so that they can recognize and identify problematic game use before it becomes severe. Now, let's discuss what I still need to do. I need to finish my peer reviews. I need to finish and correctly format my front matter. I also need to add a figure and a table to my reports. After I do all of that, I need to revise based on peer reviews and do one last final revision and review for grammar before I turn everything in. So that's all I have. Thank you for your time, and please leave any comments or advice. Thank you.